Tuba.
Dear participants, welcome to the 37th Science and Society meeting, which is organized by İstanbul Ticaret University. Today, we are having a very reputable guest, Professor Dr. Neharika Vohra'yı from Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad, and she'll be talking about funding women entrepreneurs, especially from the lens of the investors. And she'll be talking about that. She's a very reputable author at the same time, and she shares a book with Robbins in the field of organizational behavior, and we are using her book in our lectures as well. And she also served as different positions. She was a vice rector in her university as well. So thank you very much for accepting our invitation, dear Professor Vohra'yı. We are very happy to host you in our university, in our webinar. So welcome to our webinar right now.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tugba, for your kind introduction.
And our Vice Rector, Professor Dr. Ömer Çaha will make an opening speech. Buyurun hocam.
Thank you so much. Dear colleagues, dear students, ladies and gentlemen.
Can you hear me?
Do you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yes, distinguished Professor Neharika Vohra'yı from India. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to the 37th Science and Society meetings organized by İstanbul Ticaret University. As you know, we are going through a difficult time as a nation. Unfortunately, the earthquakes that were effective in 10 of our cities caused the death of around 40,000 people, thousands of injuries, and the destruction of thousands of buildings. I strongly believe that we will overcome this great tragedy and we will recover soon as a great nation. It is very pleasing for all of us that the Science and Society meetings, which started 3 years ago, have reached its 37th program. On behalf of our university, I would like to express my feelings of more than thanks and appreciation to Professor Neharika Vohra'yı, who kindly accepted our invitation and honoring us by participating in this important event. I would also like to express my feelings of thanks and appreciation to Professor Tuğba Karabulut, who organizes this important event. Professor Vohra'yı will tell us today about women's entrepreneurship and its importance from the perspective of the investor. Women's entrepreneurship is an important issue, especially in developing societies. As you know, as a society gets stronger when women are economically independent and empowered. But it's a matter of fact that women face what is known in literature as glass ceiling problem worldwide. There are a number of reasons behind that sociological problem. Lack of social networks, the double career that women live as mother and professional, negative social perceptions against women, in particular in working life, institutional cultures, the mobbing against women are some of the problems stood behind and foster the glass ceiling syndrome. And we call that syndrome indeed. It is so fundamental problem, unfortunately. Another serious problem, particularly the women entrepreneurs are suffering, is the lack of funding. And this is the issue of today's presentation. When women are attempting to invest, they face with the problems in finding financial support because of biases which is the core of the issue of today's meeting, against women, stemming from numerous factors associated to the cultural and sociological values. Prof. Vohra'yı will focus on this important issue in detail. As I have another program organized previously, I would not be able to follow the whole program. So I'm sorry at the beginning for that, but I fully believe that this program will fill an important gap in its field, and you will, as participants, have an intellectually fruitful and inspiring presentation. As I end my speech, I wish this program to be successful once again, and I send my respect to all participants and my special thanks and appreciation once again to Professor Vohra'yı and to Professor Tuğba Hoca from my university. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ömer Hocam. Thank you, we appreciate. Yeah, today we will be talking about the case of missing women entrepreneurs, looking at it from the lens of investor bias. And Professor Vohra'yı, yeah, the stage is yours. Please start. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Tuğba. Thank you, Professor Omar Chaha, for the kind words. I really look forward to a relationship and also sharing some of my work. I am a little, I think the internet connection is not very good, so just be patient. I will continue to talk, and in case I get disconnected, I'll immediately get connected. It never happens, but today I don't know what's happening. So what I'm going to do today is actually is a study that one of my PhD students I worked on for almost 2.5 years, where we started with this whole data, and maybe some of the data that you would see is not completely Turkish, but you will see that, and we've checked it with the GEM report, and we've checked it with the MasterCard report. The numbers are not very different, but the fact is that out of the 8.05 million, that is only 13.76% of the enterprises are actually owned by women across the world. And there is a fair amount of studies to show that post-pandemic women entrepreneurial activity has actually gone down in all countries, except maybe a few in that. And the GEM 2019 and 21 report actually show that the numbers per 100 business owners is going down rather than going up, which is again a very sad number for us to look at. And the fact that that even 92%, like while we could say this for traditional businesses, what is also very difficult for us to accept is the fact that even in the startups, the 92% of the startups are founded by men, while only 5.77% are founded by at least one female in India, and there is a drop from 6% again over the year. And only women founders is actually 2.64%. 15% of the startups have, only 15% have more than 50% women employees. And out of the 100 unicorns, only 3 have a woman leader in India. Also, it is not just that we have few startups, but we also need to look at the fact that less than 6% of the total funding goes to women as co-founders. It further reduces to 1.5% when they are solo women founders, and funding probability of women-led startups is actually 12% in late stage and as low as 6% in seed stage. And only the traction report shows that there are only 2% women investors. So the startup space is very very skewed. The funding scenario is very skewed. The funders are very skewed. So that was the premise with which we started to look at. And what we found was that, and of course there are reports to show that economic women, whenever women are part of the entrepreneurial mindset, there is a part of the entrepreneurial landscape, potential for more women getting jobs increases. So there is overall, I think we need to start looking at why is it that there are so few women startups. And when we start to look at the research and we start to look at what is being talked about as to why women have why there are fewer women in the startup space, very often we find that the conversation goes into that there is something wrong with the entrepreneur, that there is something that the women lack, and as a result there are fewer women. And it could be things like there are the Diana project, US Diana project in 2001 looked at more than 300 academic articles, and they all spoke about the fact that women are less ambitious and women don't want to take leadership positions. They are more interested in other things. And what the project goes on to show is that a lot of it is myths. Right. Again, one of the things people talk about is that women, while they're getting educated, are getting mostly degrees in liberal arts and health-related courses. And in the kind of startups that are being talked about today, they don't have the right educational background. Or many times the whole idea is that they look at family members as partners. They don't have enough networks. So they're not going out in the world to look at the networks. They resist growth in the light of the quality of life and work family considerations. The less growth oriented, less capital intensive businesses are chosen by them. And even there are studies to show or to say that they have lower tolerance of risk. Another kind of studies look at the fact that they stick to traditionally female type industries. They look at more women domains such as baking, beautification, motherly experiences, and so on and so forth. And the fact is that the women don't get enough funding or they don't attract enough funding is another reason that is given for why women there aren't enough women. Also, that of course seems like, if at all something needs to be fixed, it is the women that need to be fixed, because if they were fixed, then there would be more women startups. So we also said that seems quite, that to me doesn't sound like a right reason, because who says women are less capable or less interested or less all of that, unless we look at more data. So what we looked at is also we looked at how investors look at women startups, and because getting money is a very important aspect of whether you will succeed in your startup or even whether you will start a startup. So for example, we found that there are studies to show that men founders are seen as more attractive, the kind of questions that are asked to men versus women. And you can go and look at whether a Shark Tank, or you can look at this research. It says women are asked more prevention focused questions and men are asked more promoter focused questions. What will you do? Women who signal more of entrepreneurial alignment are often told that they again, may be looked at in a promotive way. With women, there is a more use of concrete language. With male founders, there is a use of abstract speech. There is prejudice that is displayed in feminine stereotype behavior by entrepreneurs, which clashes with notions of an ideal entrepreneur and business competency, prejudicing as a matter of taste and preference. And passion is a double-edged sword. If they are seen as less passionate, they are not ready to do a startup. If they're more passionate, they're seen as not practical and too emotional. So the thing is that if you do, you are a problem. If you don't do, you're a problem. So what we want to say is that the research gap is that we don't want to just look at women as having a deficit. What we wanted to do is, because there is really no basis for it. 50% of the population, give and take a few, in most across the world is women, and there is nothing to say that women should be less capable than men. So what we wanted to look at is the investor bias literature, where there is some literature to show that men and women investors actually have a bias against women entrepreneurs. There is some literature, it's not fully there. The fact is that there is a lack of diversity within the VC community, the venture capitalist community, and therefore the popular suggestion that you will often hear is add more women to investor biases teams, and this will alleviate the bias. And I think what we wanted to do is we wanted to test it, and we want to look at what will help us explain the missing women in the startup ecosystem. Okay, so I will take you further on this. We did two studies, two very, very different studies to look at it. The first study, we actually got access to funding conversations. Thank God to COVID, because a lot of the funding conversations, of course, thank God to COVID, it seems like a very short-sighted view. But all I'm saying is because a lot of things had moved online, a lot of funding conversations had also moved online. And given our contacts at the Center of Innovation and Incubation in the university, we decided, we approached them and we said, we would like to be a fly on the wall when these conversations are happening. So we don't want to in any way affect the process. We will just be a little black window sitting in the Zoom, and we will be listening into the conversations and we will be recording the conversations. So the whole idea was to look at what kind of investor comments are made by the investors towards men and women entrepreneurs. So we looked at choice of words, emotions displayed when treating women and men is what we were interested in. So for that, what we did was we basically, sat through one-on-one conversations that happened between investors and founders. As I said, we were a fly on the wall. We were able to look at 52 interactions of this kind. 42 were of those used for in-textual analysis, and the 10 that we could not use were because they were either too short or for some reason the recording was not allowed, or we weren't able to retrieve the recording. So if you look at it, of the 42, 31 were male presenters and 11 were female presenters, and we put all the investor comments and sentences together, and we used a qualitative method, the Luke analysis, to look at how many of these were really, what kind of emotions, what kind of words, what kind of biases were starting to show in the male and female investors. And what we were looking at is right here, is right here. We are showing you sentiment analysis, so positive tone, negative tone, anxiety, anger, shown by the investors toward the investees. And we also looked at certain things like affiliation, achievement, power, words of the investor, right? So typically you should not expect any difference in these. It's a startup. If at all, the differences should be random. gender should have no difference in terms of positive or negative tone, anxiety, anger, politeness, rudeness, all of that. And so we went in thinking there would be no difference, but let me show you the results. And just at your own risk, you might be actually quite surprised by what we show you. So for example, what we found was, if you look at towards the male presenters, there was the positive tone was much higher, significantly higher than the female presenters, which is okay. I think the more interesting thing is that the negative tone towards the presenters in investor comments towards female presenters was much higher than for male presenters. There is no reason why this should happen, but that is what happened, right? So we also looked at, see, these are some of the comments, right? From the beginning of the conversation, there's a lot of, this is really good, good enough for me, thank you, I'm good to go, thank you very much, and so on and so forth, all the best is what we would hear. I like your story, the family legacy bit, but your projections are not aggressive. I do not see projections that investors would want to come for. So again, from the beginning, there is a certain level of how they respond to them. Here is another one, display of anxiety. Again, you should not see any difference, but sorry, there was. Towards the female presenters, there were more anxiety words than towards the female presenters. And I think what really was very surprising for us was words of anger that were much more common for the female presenters than the male presenters. And please remember that there were only 11 female presenters and there were more male presenters. Even when we controlled for words and sentences and all of that, it didn't make a difference. This was not significant, but this was significant. Again, what we found, again, very interesting words that were, right? So this particular, they were very sure, these women were very, very confident about their work. They knew the science behind what they were presenting. But there was, so allow me to just take this back, give it some thought, think it through the context and structure. Maybe if I have questions, I will come into question. See the words, you are losing out that way as an investor. I'm warning you that is not the way forward. You have to get some fresh blood into the organization. So these were two women who were 50-year-old, and they already had a business that they had already started, and they were doing really well. They needed more money, and the investors were pushing them to bring their son. And their son is doing PhD in physics and has nothing to do with the business. But the whole idea was, if you don't bring your business is not, your business is not going to run. Never did we hear such a conversation with a male. What is your child doing? Why don't you bring your child into this? Never heard this. Okay, same thing. Let's go further. Let's look at social behavior, right? So are you, just the words such as, are you, how do you call them, right? Bro, buddy. Have you been to Sam's place? It's a cool hangout place. We should meet next time here, and so on and so forth. You don't hear this for women, right? It's a very formal conversation. The mostly towards women, the word is ma'am, last name with title. So you close down the first startup. You and your co-founder started this business. What happened? So questions that are more related to figuring out what is happening with these people. So again, very different, you can see there is a significant difference in how the men and women founders were treated, right? And as we said, we used a fairly well-used dictionary to look at these. So can't really say that part of it is, just because we were biased towards it. So polite behavior, again, I would think that polite behavior should be common. Why should there be any different? But look at the numbers. Yeah, male presenters 14.89 words, female presenters 7.85 words, and similarly interpersonal comments towards the men and women were very different, right? So again, a very right. And so if you look at the orange one, which is the comments made toward women, these women were again very good at their science. They were from a very, very prestigious university in the US and India. And yet, you know, the investor was questioning their science. Made no sense. So again, very simply, just for you all to look at the fact that the question, do women and men and women founders get treated differently by investors? I would say yes. Investors make the final decision based on the idea, judgment and potential of the idea, and trust and liking for the founder. And the results of our study show that for some reason, because of some unconscious biases, there is a possibility that the men investors actually start out not liking the women founders as much, and that not liking comes up in a anger, anxiety, rudeness, not being as social and friendly towards them. And if we go back to the theory, there is the social roles theory that possibly some of you might have heard about, where a woman's role as an entrepreneur is not seen as congruent with her expected role. Thus, it attracts suspicion and even backlash. Even though these studies are in the 2000 and 2011, unfortunately, in 2023, things don't seem to have changed very much. And also the fact that there are social psychology theories that talk about in-group attractiveness and homophily. We all like people who are like us, and therefore, as a result, men like men founders more than women founders. So possibly having more women founders would actually help. More women in the investor community will actually help to improve outcomes for women for the work that they do. However, you know, that is what we wanted to test in our second study. And that's the experiment that we did, in which we wanted to look at the, you know, when there are mixed gender investor groups, investors who are men and women, do they end up looking at men and women founders differently? So this was a typical experiment. We took students who are studying MBA in their second year. So they all have taken finance courses. A lot of our students are very interested in becoming, you know, doing finance, being in part of the investing committee, investor organizations, and they also want to do startups. So we recruited MBA students from IIMs across the country. And what we did was we designed a 2x5 study to look at what are the team processes that happen when more women are present in the investor group. So, you know, do women speak more? Do they yield more or yield less? Do they have more influence on members when they are part of the investor committee? So the study was again fairly complex, done completely during times of COVID, so all online. So what we did was we looked at, you know, what was the funding decision, what was the funding amount, and what was the equity that was asked for in the business. We looked at airtime actual that the person spent during the 30 minutes that they were part of this conversation, the airtime perceived, the kind of initiative they took, and the interruptions. We looked at whether they thought they had expertise, whether they expressed expertise, whether they displayed expertise, and how others looked at them to look at influence. And of course, in yielding, we looked at what the funding decision was, what the funding amount was, and what the equity stake in business was, what their initial one was, and what the group one was. So what we did was So we went to 22 premier B schools. So we had 720 participants who consented, who were asked to give their preferred slot to us so that we could schedule the experiments. We wrote an introduction mail. We created Zoom credentials for them. We create just to control for name, effect of name. We gave every person who participated in the study for the 30 minutes an alias name, which was put on the Zoom window, and they were supposed to address each other using that name. This was to control for any other biases that might come. We, of course, had hold candidates for every group because there is a possibility that while people signed up, they would not show up. And of course, we sent them many reminder mails before the study happened. We had a health tech pitch. Again, this pitch had been tested. It was not a real pitch, but it had been tested. We got some investors to actually run by it. And it was a 10-minute, 30-second pitch. And it was creating a product for asthma patients. And it seemed quite relevant at that point of time. And the pitch was either made by a woman or a man. Right, so we had a male presenter and a female presenter, and we gave a one-pager which described the details of the pitch as well as the equity asked and the money that was being requested. What we asked the participants before they started was to, after listening to the pitch, because they listened to it individually, they had to make a decision of go or no go. They had to decide on what amount they were going to do, how much stake did they want in business, and whether they trusted the founder or not. And after that, they had a 25-minute discussion, and then they again had to make the decision whether it was a go or no go, but it was a group decision. They again had to make the same three things: how much funding and how much stake in business. And at the very end, after that decision had been done, we asked them a few questions, such as how satisfied they were with their participation in the group discussion. Do they think, did they influence or were they influenced by others? Who they thought was mostly influential in the group. Also, we'll ask them to say how close they were to their usual self. And of course, we did post-experimental questionnaire and all that. And then after that, we gave them a debrief of what the study was about. And then we also sent them some things for saying that this is what we did. Now, again, take you through some of the outcomes. I'm sorry, there are a lot of graphs. It was a complex experiment, so the results are a little complex as well. But what we found was that if you see, so K1 is where it is all male, K2 is where there is one female, K3 is when there are equal number of men and women, and K4 is when there are three women and one man, three women and two men, and K5 was when there was 4 women and 1 man. So majority woman is K5, majority men is K1, and K3 is equal number of men and women. And if you look at across the group composition, what is interesting is both men, it didn't matter. The women founders did get a yes more often. So you might think, okay, so actually there is no bias towards women, right? So women actually got more funding. They got funding. But what we need to look at is it's not as simple, because what we found was in a token woman group, right? 2 out of 3 rejected pitches were women founders pitches. However, in a token man group, 2 out of 3 rejected pitches were male founders pitches. So again, good idea that actually when there are more men, when there are more women, the male pitches are getting rejected more often. However, that's just part of the story. If you look at the means of the funding amount that was offered to men and women, you will be surprised to see that men were given by all groups a higher funding, right? So yes, I'm funding the women more, but I'm giving them very much lower funding as compared to the men. So that was one thing that was interesting. So just look at the graphs. And the other thing is, when we asked, how much funding would you give, right, to a woman funder or a male funder at an individual level, we found that women founders will get higher funding amount by women investors across groups, except, of course, across groups. But as the proportion of women increases in the investor group, the women within the group will invest higher funding amounts in ideas presented by women founders. So what is interesting is that just the presence of other women improves the amount of funding they will give to women as compared to men. So as more women are part of the group, we are happier, because what we are seeing is that while they might get lesser funding overall, but they also gave the women found investors actually gave a little higher to the women, especially when they were in majority. So there is argument for having more women investors. What we also found was that all investors will ask for smaller stakes in ideas presented by men founders, not really found. And so we actually did not find any difference on the fact that they were significant difference on the stake asked in the business. Now, stake asked in the business is typically saying, how much do I trust you? And if you look at as the number of women increased, the stake asked from them was smaller as compared to when the men were in majority. But what is also interesting to note, even if it is not significant, that the men actually get asked for a very average stake, other than the K2, which might be an outlier. They actually get around 16 to 15% stake. This one is interesting. So now this is about what I was first showing is about the outcomes. But I think what I also want to show you is what did we find in terms of men and women's participation, right? And here, if you see that male participation, actual percentage, went down as men increased in the group, as women increased in the group, right? Male participation perceived, when you asked who was speaking more, actually men, even though they spoke less, the women perceived the men speaking more, right? Women's participation, actual, went up again as women increased in the group, but women participation perceived went down as women increased in the group. So what we're also saying is that the women, even though they actually speak more, they don't get perceived by others as having spoken as much, right? So therefore their likelihood of influence comes down, because even though they might be speaking at the same rate, they might be improving, but really there is something in the perception that is off in terms of men and women. And you can see again that in the groups where women are minority, the difference between the actual and the perceived is much higher as compared to when the women are in majority. So again, something for us to look at. So I will, move for you. So next question is, who initiates, right? We thought that women will initiate more often as the number of women in the investor group increases. Didn't find that. In all investor groups, men will initiate more often as compared to women investors, significant. So irrespective of whether there are men who are in majority or minority, men ended up being the more initiating more often. Similarly, we found that we didn't find that the men interrupted more overall, which is something that we have read in the literature, but that is not what we found. But we did find that as the men increase, their interruptions are higher, and women interruptions also go higher as women in the group increase. So when we are in same gender groups, men will interrupt, women will interrupt, but when we are in mixed gender groups, more likely the majority group, the majority gender is likely to interrupt. Okay, so then the next one was, we asked the groups before the study how comfortable they were with funding and financing evaluation. And we found that men, irrespective of whether they, they were more comfortable in their evaluation funding, even before the study started. And the women, you can see, are like really low. They're good, but they personally believe that they are not as good in this case. So that is interesting for us to look at. What we asked again was, who did the financial evaluation, right? Did women do it or men do it? Again, you can see when the men are in majority, men do the financial evaluation. Even when they are not in majority, even then the man is doing the evaluation more often. So men did not sit, the women did not take up a paper and start doing the calculations. They allowed the men to did it. So 48% times women did financial evaluation, while 81% times men did it. And the fact is that while women said they were not as good at evaluation, but when you actually observe them, and we gave them some ratings on what kind of words they used and so on and so forth, actually women are equally good, but they don't do the evaluation. They don't think they are good, but when you really look at the data, and we were coding it, we actually don't find the women to be less competent when they are, they're not less expert, they're not less competent, but the belief is that they are less competent and their behavior is that they are less competent. So that is something that we found. Again, very interestingly, we asked who had more influence. And you can see the graph. Irrespective, the airtime was not different, the evaluations are not different, but the men were seen as more influential. And I think what was very surprising is that the male, the token male was seen as most influential in the majority women group. So even in the majority women group, it is not a woman who is seen as more influential. It is a man, that one man who's seen as more influential. And that, I think, is another thing for all of us to look at. So again, we asked who yields, right? So I decided I will do a go, well, but the group decided no go. So did men or women lead more? And what we found was that men yielded from their funding decision less in male majority groups, and women yielded less in female majority groups. So again, very interestingly, that men yielded their funding amount and funding stake much less for male founders as compared to female founders. And but for so for males, they decided and they stayed with it. For female founders, they gave some room to, depending on who was talking to them and so on and so forth. So again, in yielding, we found some interesting behavior. So what we found, it's a mixed bag, right? We don't have a clear story, but there are certain things that are very clear, right? So go forward. We have in the crowdfunding literature, there is something shown as reciprocal obligation, and a sense of shared struggle propels women investors to contribute more to the causes of female campaigners. This is what the studies show. Men funders, on the other hand, are increasingly aware of diversity and equality concerns, and they want to do justice and offer an equal playing field to the best of their capabilities. So, there is a certain movement. And maybe that is why when we showed them male founders and female founders, they typically, the female founders were given a go-ahead more by the men and the women. But the other part of the story is the stake that was offered to the women was much less than the stake that was offered to the equity that was offered to the women was much less than the men. So, for example, while with awareness, I am possibly saying a yes, but I'm also disadvantaging the woman a lot more at this point of time. Okay, so what we found is, yeah, I've already spoken this. We've, and we also have been collecting some data on Shark Tank episodes. And again, we find that women founders are often given less money. Yeah, and they are asked for a higher stake by the funder, because either they don't trust the woman funder or they think they can take her for a ride. So again, while there is evidence of welcoming women entrepreneurs, but biases are continuing. And what we also found is that men in the groups continuously funded the women founders below the $1 million mark, which is what they had not asked. So I think what we are saying also is that men are more confident in their knowledge of finance. When we started recruiting students, already in our MBA classes, there are fewer women than men. In the sign-up ratios, the men were very happy to sign up. The women we had to coax to sign up. A lot of women who signed up and agreed that they will come actually did not come for the study. So even there, even to come for a study, they feel less confident. And that was very surprising to us. While women are mostly more conscientious, and when they agree, they come and so on and so forth. But for this study, we had great difficulty getting women to honor their commitments, even when they had signed up. I think one other thing I want to say is that women not only expressed or displayed knowledge less often, but they also perceived other women as not possessing the knowledge. So, when we asked them who possesses knowledge, it was always a man who they did. So very willing to give away their competence and not look at the competence of other women is something that, we found in this case. And again, there are studies to show that when you have more women, there will be less stereotyping, and especially when the task is atypical. But what we found was that actually women were perceived as wielding less influence irrespective of their actions in the group. So again, they were not perceived as influential as they really were if you go back and just look at the data without, anyone saying what they were saying. So this is what we said, that no difference was found in actual airtime, but both men and women perceived differently in peer ratings. They thought the men spoke more. We also found early talking, initiative taking, assertive verbal behavior, higher interruptions, all of that, a lot more by the men than the women. This data we are still coding and we're still working on, because we have all the recorded conversations, but as of now, this is what we find. As I've already said, that while women did not contribute less, they started less often, interrupted less, and did not take the lead in calculations. They also, what is interesting, nuanced understanding, they did not show flexibility in their decision making, and they were very shy in supporting women founders when the men or women were in the majority. So irrespective of their contribution, they were seen to contribute less, is what we found. That men adapted and molded their decision more easily, while women in general stuck to their initial choice, which again has often been found that the more confident you are, the less likely you are, the more confident you are, the less likely you are to to conform to another group. And therefore, what has been found in Cross et al. Study of self-confidence, gender, and conformity also was seen in our study. So women are less confident, they conform more, and they are perceived to conform more and influence less. So all in all, what I'm trying to say is that in our study, women founders may have got a go, but they got a smaller amount, and they were not as supported by the women founders as we did. And if we looked at the group dynamics between the investors, the men were seen to still have more power and influence in the group, while the women were not really, while the women were actually also quite influential. So I think the suggestion that is often given, that add more women to the group will change decisions, is something that we all need to rethink, because just adding more women is not going to be sufficient. I think we will need to do a little more than, add women and then train them, make them aware of their biases and their own competence before they get into that. So sometimes what is called a psychological reactance, if we create that, maybe we will find a little more forthcoming decision making and participation by women. And that's again the something that another study we would need to do. So I will thank you very much for listening to this presentation. It's been a lot of work, but it's been also very interesting for us to look at it. Thank you. Happy to take questions.
Dear Professor Vohra, it was very nice presentation. We appreciate your efforts, and you basically shed a light to a very important topic. So we are very happy to hear all of this. And I would like to ask, what might be the appropriate strategies for women to follow to be a successful entrepreneur, to be selected, and maybe to make cooperations with other women, other business people? Could you please give some information?
So my belief is that given our study and given our biases, what we found, I think it is good to have to have mixed gender groups. It is good to have men and women present together rather than only women present in a group, especially when you're going to investors. The third thing that I think is important is to be aware of the fact that the funder is going to treat you maybe with not the same respect and collegiality as they are likely to treat another male funder, and therefore not get too upset with it, and actually kind of create a thick skin. It's okay. My purpose is not about whether you treat me well. My purpose is to convince you that my idea is good and I want money from you. So I think when we followed up with a lot of the women who the investors were speaking to, many times they said they got very ruffled during the conversation. They felt they were disrespected, they were not listened to, or they were asked too many questions. And as a result, their performance went down as they were asking questions. And they were willing to give up more or ask for less money in that entire thing. And I think our study shows that if women can be made aware of some of these possible behaviors of the male funders, it is good for them to kind of say that, yes, this is going to come, but let's be different. Let me not take it to heart. It's not personal. It's just between us, and I want to still get my money, and I still want to present my idea. And a lot of times we give up, and the important thing is to stay and to be there and not give up at the first no is very important.
Okay, thank you very much. And Osman Hoca, are you available to ask questions? He's our also associate professor in the field of organizational behavior, and I think he uses your book for his lectures.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Vohra.
Thank you.
I sent my pleasure for your valuable presentation. I think your presentation data come from Indian society.
Yes.
How it can change according to other society, for example, Turkey society.
Yeah. So I don't know so much about Turkey, but and would love to see the study replicated to see what happens there. But if I were to just use cultural context, and if I were to look at the numbers of women and men in startup,
Do I have any connection problem?
ways of showing those biases, and also maybe the group dynamics might be a little different, but they can't be very off from what in India, because in many cases, at least the outcomes that we see across the world, and they get less money, and therefore there must be some biases that are operating in there. However, we all need to test it to really say whether it would or would not be.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Always, would you like to ask a question? He's our PhD student, and you met with him. You had the same
Yes.
last name. It's very interesting.
Yes, it's really interesting, Professor. Yes, by the way, the webinar is really good. Thank you, Professor Vohra'yı. It was really good, and I learned lots of things. I have one question that what do you think about it, that can women entrepreneurs reach new customers, suppliers, and business opportunities for their product and service? Or if not, then what do you think is the biggest challenge or obstacle for it?
You know, I think we understand that there are social structures that stop women from, being present spheres in equal numbers. So whether it is the stereotypes, or whether the families don't support, or whether there is a very, from 13-year onwards, there is this whole thing about, women do this and men do this. So there is gender roles that get very specific, and so on and so forth. So I think it's a combination of all of these. To go out there and you are in a minority, and that is, I think, something that we all need to be kind of aware of. And I think this change will be slow. However, the changes have to be also across dimensions, educational, and also in the workplace, and policies that the government sets up to encourage women. So I think it has to be more multidimensional than one or two in that sense.
A lot, Professor. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you. Raif, hi. Would you like to ask a question? He's our PhD student.
Hi, Professor. Thank you so much. Thank you, Professor Vohra'yı, for your time and for
Thank
your
you.
data. I just want to say that I mentioned that the statistics you presented is similar somehow to the data were mentioned in the National Women's Business Council in 2022, where 38% of the total family, the total businesses in US are owned by women. Despite of that, just 2% of them receiving a capital funding. For that, my question is, what do women entrepreneurs need to have to start a global venture successfully?
I think global enterprises are complex for both men and women. And so if you really want to start a global enterprise, you have to, you have to move out of your formal, informal, smaller, known networks. You have to become part of more formal networks, and women do find it sometimes difficult to tap into global formal networks because there are resistance. Some level of international education, some level of having international connects becomes important because at the end of the day, in many countries, business is transacted as much formally as much as it is also transacted through formal channels. And so I think it's important that women, if they really want to do a global business, they network more, they have more ways to tap into formal, informal networks that are global, and also, start, and the whole, you can't decide after having run a small boutique. I think in most cases, while there might be exceptions, your DNA has to be that this is a global international business. So if you create it as part of your strategy and DNA as you start the business, even then if you start in a small city in Turkey, you will have always the capabilities to go global. But if you start off by thinking that I'm going to start a small business in Ankara and then somewhere, at some 10 years later, it will become international, it just doesn't. I think it has to be part of the strategy in that sense. And it's true for all of us to do that.
Thank you so much, Professor.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mehmet Bey, would you like to ask a question? He's our also PhD student.
Okay.
Sesiniz gelmiyor. Ses, voice.
Sorry. Thank you, Professor Tuba. Hi, Professor Vohra. Nice to meet you. And it is very useful and great to your presentation. And I think I got lots of things from that. And my question is, are you aware of any public or private sector programs that support buying goods or services from women-owned businesses?
There are many. In fact, for example, Coca-Cola at some point decided that they will start to make their supply chain more gender neutral. And in fact, they skewed it towards women. So in many parts of Africa, in many parts of India, in many parts of Vietnam, in many parts of Cambodia, they only started to give out their contracts to women suppliers and women supply chain holders. Seeing that, there are other organizations that have also attempted it, and with limited success or great success, depending on how much effort they put into it. But I think there are private organizations that are realizing that if they really want to make an impact in the societies that they operate in, they have to make women as part of this. And also, I don't know about Turkey, but in India, for example, when we do buying for government organizations, we use it is called an e-marketplace. Yeah. And in the e-marketplace, there is a special section for products made by women. And if you buy from that section, you get a little discount, or you get a little brownie points for having bought from that section. So let's say you're buying paint and you can buy it from usual business, you can buy it from a women-run paint business, you will get a little, some level of discount on it, or you will get some points on it. So the e-marketplace, the government e-marketplace, it is called the GEM, has a whole section which is called Womania, which is basically where women-owned enterprises are specially listed. They also have the same for disability-owned enterprises, but they also have for women. And I think that's an interesting initiative. It's been there for 3 years now. And from some of the data that I've looked at, there is a traction that the women owners are getting because of getting listed and getting exposure to the entire country buyers in that process.
Thanks so much. That's great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So it's good that they support the disadvantaged groups, we can say, right? Indian government.
Yes.
Yeah, great. And Gıyas, would you like to ask a question?
Yes, hello and good evening for everyone. Can you hear me?
He's our PhD student as well.
Yes, it was very nice to meeting you today. It was a good chance for us to learn more and more about this subject. I'm a little bit interested into the barriers that created by the law or the resulting practices to make it more difficult for women to start and grow a business. As I see in the World Bank, there's a kind of measurement for the easy to do business, for example. And I logged in and I saw my country, which is Iraq, and I saw there was a barrier of the law there because they are telling in this website there's a part of law that's preventing women from working unless they get approval from their husband. For example, such a thing, especially with the new challenge of the after Corona, the Arabic world and these things. So I'm interested to hear from you, Professor, about this, and thank you in advance.
Thank you. So good question. I think we have enough unstated barriers for women to overcome to actually start to get to anywhere near to, maybe half. Right. And then if we have countries that start to put barriers because of whatever reasons, special permissions, special signatures, and so on and so forth, then we are really making it a very difficult race for women to actually, so you're starting this with a disability, you're starting with a lack of privilege, or starting with a, like a handicap. So I would be, I think we should, all researchers should kind of put our, speak more about the barriers that women face. And as a result, even if they are very competent and they are making good products, they somehow don't get heard and accepted. So maybe I think it's important that we all look at some other ways in how we can possibly, just lobby a little more, get more women to have an equal platform to start off with. And I think, that's where some of our research possibly becomes meaningful. So yeah, we, as I just said, women already have too many barriers, not stated, sometimes structured, sometimes, we've, women as women, we have swallowed them and we accept it as a barrier while it may not be a barrier. So I don't think we need any more barriers put to, to do more jumps before we can get to the space. And the reason I'm saying this, and I think just the fact that, the research shows that women-owned businesses do well. There is nothing to show that they don't do well. And the second thing is they create a lot of social good. They offer more employment to women. They also sometimes, in most cases, are in areas which are not addressed by male enterprises. So I think in a way there's a social good to creating women-held enterprises. So, and therefore, I think just making it more easy for them to do business would be very good. I don't know if I answered your question, but this is my belief on that.
Thank you. You are in the field of organizational behavior. Also, you conduct research in the field of entrepreneurship. What might be your suggestions to researchers? Which areas should they focus on?
Right. So one of the things in entrepreneurship is that a lot of, we don't have experimental research in entrepreneurship. So I think it would be a good idea to look at, how we can conduct certain experiments to ask questions that might be relevant for us to look at. The second thing is to actually do more research, cross-cultural research on what might be some of the social barriers, or what might be the effect of some of the social barriers or this cultural context on women's performance in entrepreneurship and choices they make around it. So that could be the second. And I think more and more, if we can do research on implicit biases that stop women from doing well, both theirs and those of their family and the customer and all of that, would really help us to create more education awareness programs to overcome these biases, or at least to get ourselves a little free of them as we go along. So researchers can look at it. That I think would help. Also, I don't think we need to only look at, entrepreneurship for women. There's also entrepreneurship itself has a lot of interesting work for us to do. So one of my other research, for example, we are looking at the whole concept of of multiple job holdings. So, in the current context, we are finding a lot of youth who do a primary job and then they have a side hustle. So they might be baking cakes, they might be writing content for somebody, they might be teaching somebody, they might be, lending their voice for voiceovers and book audibles and so on and so forth. So there is a lot of experience that we are finding of youth who are not only doing one job, and organizations have no way to deal with it, because organizations typically have thought that it is one job, one person, right? So you cannot have other sources of income. You should not be doing anything for profit and so on and so forth. But the youth today are saying, look, you can't guarantee me my job. My job cannot give me everything that I want to do in life. I have a lot of energy and time. There is technology that helps me. So I'm going to do multiple jobs, right? And so again, there's a tension point, if you see, between, does everybody have to be a full-time entrepreneur? Can they be part-time entrepreneurs? Can as organizations, we start to look at this tension point between what the youth wants, what career choices they want to make, and what kind of career choice, what kind of organizational policies that organizations are making. So I think these are very interesting questions for organization behavior researchers to look at, because there's just so much fascinating stuff happening in terms of just the way the nature of work is changing for all of us.
And the last question, I'm just wondering that, what are your suggestions to female entrepreneurs, women entrepreneurs, not to be discouraged, because, they can be discouraged easily, okay? Yes. And also there are women corporate entrepreneurs as well.
Yes.
So what might be your suggestions for them not to be discouraged, not to be unhappy?
All right. Thank you for that question. I think first thing is that we need to find our friends. Yeah, we need to find other women. We need to find more supportive men. We need to find mentors. We need to find role models who have done this despite everything that they have faced, and the people who will help us when we are in our dumps, right? So there are going to be times when we are not going to be finding it so exciting or hopeful and so on and so forth. And as a result, I think women entrepreneurs or women managers or corporate entrepreneurs all need to have some kind of a North Star. If she's done it, I can do it as well. Can I find friends? Can I find allies? Can I find men and women allies? Can I start to also have this conversation with my family to share what this business does for me? It's not just for the money or whatever, but it also changes me. So that conversation helps, because many times it is often seen as, I'm earning the money, why do you need to do anything? At least in India, that's a very common conversation among a husband and a wife. And therefore, I think it's important to start to say that it's not just about money, it's about creating value, giving my best, addressing social problems and so on and so forth. That becomes important. And I think just support other women, because that makes the base bigger and stronger for us to work with.
Thank you very much for your nice presentation, for your nice answers. We are very happy to host you in our university's webinar today. And we would
Thank you
like
so
to
much.
see you in our university as well. Whenever you
Thank
want,
you.
feel free to
Thank
keep in
you.
touch, contact with us. And we would like to see you in our university. Maybe you
Thank you
can
so
give a
much.
speech here. We can organize a meeting here so that you can
Wonderful.
meet with us face to face. And also, if there are some research opportunities, we'll be more than happy to cooperate with you. And if
Absolutely.
there are also different opportunities to cooperate with your university, so we'll be more than happy to cooperate with your university.
Be my pleasure. My pleasure.
Thank
Thank you
very
so
much for
much.
accepting
Thank you
our
so
offer.
much.
And we
Yes,
would like
thank
to
you so
see
much. And lovely questions. And I'm happy to answer any questions, or if any of the research students have any questions about, how we did the research, happy to answer it offline as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you,
very
Dr. Tugba, for your kind words and hosting the event.
much.
Thank
We
you.
would like to see you in our universities soon.
I hope so. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Okay, bye.